She showed her daughter-in-law Pepper, even sacrificed her grandchild and almost destroyed her son's marriage. How wicked could one woman be? This is the true story of a woman who married into a family bound by darkness, where love became a weapon and motherhood became a death sentence. The warning signs were always there, hidden in plain sight like shadows at noon. But Bolu, young and radiant with the kind of hope that only true love can inspire, chose to see only light. She chose to believe that kindness could conquer cruelty, that patience could transform poison into peace. She had no idea that the moment she said "I do," she was stepping into a carefully constructed trap that had been set long before she was born. Bolu had grown up wrapped in love like a precious gift. As the only child of parents who adored her beyond measure, she had known nothing but warmth, encouragement, and unconditional support. Her childhood home in Lagos was filled with laughter, the smell of her mother's cooking, and the sound of her father's voice reading stories before bed. She was brilliant, beautiful, and blessed with the kind of spirit that drew people to her like moths to a flame. When she enrolled at the University of Lagos to study medicine and surgery, her parents beamed with pride. Their daughter was going to save lives, to make a difference in the world. It was during her second year at university that she met Jamal. He was studying civil engineering, tall and quietly confident, with kind eyes that seemed to understand her without words. Their friendship bloomed slowly, organically, like a flower opening to the sun. They studied together in the library, shared meals at the campus cafeteria, and talked for hours about their dreams and fears. A year before graduation, something shifted between them, and friendship transformed into something deeper, something that felt like destiny. What Bolu didn't know was that Jamal was harboring a secret, one that would eventually become the foundation of her nightmare. He had deliberately kept their relationship hidden from his mother for 4 long years, and this secrecy wasn't born from shame or uncertainty. It was born from fear. Jamal knew his mother in ways that Bolu couldn't imagine, understood the dark possessiveness that burned in her heart like a jealous flame. Jamal had grown up as the only son among 3 daughters, and his mother had molded her entire existence around him after his father's death when he was just 14 years old. She didn't just love him. She consumed him. She needed to know every detail of his life, every person he spoke to, every girl who caught his eye. His previous relationships had all ended in disaster, sabotaged by a mother who saw every girlfriend as a threat, every potential wife as a thief trying to steal her most precious possession. She had driven girls away with impossible tests, cruel words, and manipulations so subtle that Jamal sometimes wondered if he had imagined them. But Bolu was different. She was the first woman Jamal had truly, deeply loved, and he was determined to protect what they had. So he hid her from his mother's gaze for 4 years, building a secret world where their love could grow without interference. When he finally proposed, slipping a ring onto Bolu's finger as they watched the sunset over Lagos, he knew the time had come to face the storm he had been avoiding. The announcement to his family created an immediate divide. His 3 sisters erupted in joy, hugging Bolu and welcoming her with genuine warmth. But his mother's face became a mask of stone, her eyes turning cold and calculating. That night, she called Jamal aside, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. Why hadn't he told her about this girl? Why had he kept such an important relationship secret? When Jamal answered honestly, telling her that he didn't want her ruining this relationship like she had ruined all the others, something broke in his mother's expression. Her heart didn't just skip a beat. It hardened into something dark and unyielding. That night, as she lay in bed, Jamal's mother didn't grieve the distance growing between her and her son. Instead, she began to plot. Her mind, twisted by years of possessive obsession and something far darker that lurked in the shadows of her past, started constructing a plan to destroy the woman who dared to steal her son's love. Meanwhile, at Bolu's family home, the atmosphere was completely different. Her parents had known about Jamal for years, had met him multiple times, and genuinely liked the young man who made their daughter's eyes light up with happiness. When Bolu showed them her engagement ring, they celebrated with tears of joy and prayers of gratitude. Bolu spent her evenings fantasizing about married life, imagining a home filled with love and children, never suspecting that she was about to enter a living nightmare. The first meeting was carefully orchestrated. Jamal, sensing his mother's cold reception of the news, begged her to be kind, to give Bolu a chance to not cause any problems. His mother agreed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, already planning exactly how she would make this girl suffer. Bolu prepared for the meeting with meticulous care. She chose her finest outfit, applied her makeup with precision, and selected the perfect perfume. She bought fruits, groceries, and all of her future mother-in-law's favorite items, determined to make a good impression. As they drove to the house, her stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. She was confident, prepared, and completely unprepared for what awaited her. The moment she walked into that living room and saw Jamal's mother sitting there with her glasses perched on her nose like a judge awaiting a criminal, Bolu felt the first whisper of unease. But she pushed it aside, falling to her knees in proper Yoruba tradition to greet the older woman with all the respect her culture demanded. The hug she received in return was stiff and cold, like embracing a statue, but Bolu smiled through it. What followed was not a warm welcome but an interrogation. Jamal's mother asked questions in the most condescending tone imaginable, her words dripping with disdain and judgment. Bolu's eyes kept darting to Jamal, searching for support, for intervention, but he sat frozen like a child afraid to speak. Still, Bolu answered every question with enthusiasm and grace, refusing to let this woman break her spirit. After 20 brutal minutes, the older woman ordered Bolu to get up and go to the kitchen to prepare food for her and her son. Not asked. Ordered. Bolu found it strange that on her first visit, she wasn't being treated as a guest but as a servant, but she went to the kitchen anyway, determined to prove herself worthy. She spent 3 hours preparing pounded yam and ifo riro, sweating over the mortar and pestle, struggling with a task she had never performed in her privileged upbringing. When the food was finally ready and served, Jamal's mother took one bite and spat it out dramatically. The pounded yam had lumps. Bolu apologized, explaining that she had never done this before, but the older woman wasn't interested in excuses. Instead, she turned to Jamal with theatrical disgust and asked how he could bring home a girl who couldn't even pound ordinary yam properly. Jamal said nothing. He sat there in silence while his mother humiliated the woman he claimed to love. Bolu couldn't believe what she was witnessing, but worse was yet to come. Next, Jamal's mother announced that the washing machine had conveniently broken the previous day, and she needed Bolu to wash some clothes by hand. When Bolu agreed and saw the mountain of laundry waiting for her, she nearly collapsed. She had never hand-washed clothes in her entire life, had grown up with house help and washing machines. But she rolled up her sleeves and spent an hour scrubbing until her hands were raw and her back ached. Meanwhile, inside the house, Jamal was begging his mother to accept Bolu, to stop treating her so harshly. His mother listened with a secret smile, already savoring her victory. The ride back to Bolu's house was suffocatingly silent. When they arrived, Jamal finally broke down and apologized. Bolu said nothing, just smiled and kissed him, determination burning in her heart. She was willing to do anything to marry this man, even endure his mother's cruelty. Inside her family home, when she told her parents everything that had happened, they were furious. How could anyone treat their beloved daughter like a servant? They immediately demanded that she cancel the wedding, warning her that if this was how her mother-in-law treated her before marriage, the situation would only worsen afterward. But Bolu refused. She convinced herself that this was normal, that her friend Kimi had gone through something similar and was now happily married. She called it a test of her responsibility and character. Her parents tried repeatedly to change her mind, but Bolu was determined. They realized, with heavy hearts, that their daughter was an adult making her own choices, even if those choices led her toward disaster. The wedding day arrived in a blur of white lace and false smiles. Vows were exchanged. Promises were made. The honeymoon was a brief paradise before reality came crashing back. When Bolu and Jamal returned home, she was shocked to find her mother-in-law already installed in their house, her belongings unpacked, her presence dominating every room. Jamal had never told Bolu about the deal he had made with his mother. The condition for his mother's blessing on the marriage was that she would move in with them immediately after the wedding. He had kept this devastating secret because he knew Bolu would never agree. They had specifically discussed not allowing any relatives to live with them after marriage, wanting to build their own private world together. The confrontation in their bedroom was explosive, but ultimately futile. Bolu felt betrayed and trapped, but what could she do? The marriage was already done, the papers signed. She had no choice but to agree, convincing herself that she would somehow make it work, that she could build a good relationship with this woman who clearly hated her. She had no idea that her mother-in-law wasn't just difficult or possessive. She was dangerous. The torture began immediately, a systematic campaign designed to break Bolu's spirit one day at a time. Every morning at 5 a.m. sharp, Bolu was expected to be awake and working. On the mornings when she overslept, exhausted from the previous day's endless tasks, her mother-in-law would storm into their bedroom with insults and accusations. Jamal never defended his wife. He simply rolled over and went back to sleep, convincing himself that Bolu was strong enough to handle it. Fresh meals had to be prepared daily. Clothes had to be hand-washed. The house had to be spotless. And slowly, insidiously, Jamal's mother began poisoning her son's mind against his wife. She complained that it wasn't appropriate for Bolu to work as a doctor, that her job interfered with her duties as a wife. On days when Bolu came home slightly late from the hospital, her mother-in-law would greet her with cutting remarks about neglecting her husband. Jamal, who had never developed the backbone to stand up to his mother, began echoing these complaints. He started suggesting that Bolu should quit her job, frame it as a sacrifice for their marriage. Bolu was devastated. She called her parents, and her father was furious, telling her never to let a man control her to that degree, especially before they even had children. But Bolu was at a crossroads, torn between her father's wisdom and her husband's demands. In the end, love made her foolish. She quit her medical career, the profession she had trained for years to master, the calling that had once defined her purpose. She became a stay-at-home wife, her days consumed with cooking, cleaning, and trying to please a mother-in-law who could never be pleased. On days when Jamal was at work, his mother made Bolu's life pure hell. She chased away Bolu's friends when they visited. She criticized every meal, every cleaning job, every word out of Bolu's mouth. Bolu's vibrant personality began to dim like a candle running out of wax. She stopped laughing. She stopped singing. She became a ghost in her own home. 8 months into the marriage, Jamal's mother began demanding a grandchild. The pressure was relentless, constant, suffocating. Bolu and Jamal began trying to conceive, but months passed with no pregnancy. The tension in the house became unbearable. Jamal's mother's mockery turned vicious, her words designed to wound as deeply as possible. She called Bolu barren, cursed, useless as a woman. What neither Bolu nor Jamal knew was the terrible truth lurking beneath the surface of this cruelty. Jamal's mother harbored a secret so dark, so twisted, that it would have seemed impossible if it weren't tragically real. Years before Jamal was even born, his mother had been desperate for a male child. She had gone to a voodoo priest, a man who dealt in blood oaths and dark bargains. She had joined a coven of witches, women who had traded their humanity for power. The price of her son's birth had been steep. The coven's rules were absolute. Its members could never have grandchildren. If they did, they would die. This was why she had destroyed all of Jamal's previous relationships. This was why she saw Bolu not as a daughter-in-law but as a death sentence walking through her door. When Jamal insisted on marrying Bolu anyway, his mother had gone back to the voodoo priest for a solution. The answer was simple and horrifying. Tie the girl's womb, make her barren, and if that failed, kill any child that was conceived. So Jamal's mother had paid for dark magic to be worked on Bolu's womb, to bind her fertility with invisible chains. But she underestimated the power of prayer, the strength of spiritual warfare that was already being waged on Bolu's behalf. Bolu had become a shell of herself, but one Sunday, she decided to visit her parents' church. She went home, picked up her parents, and attended service for the first time in a year. There, she met a pastor she had never seen before. This man took one look at her and saw past the makeup, past the forced smile, straight into the spiritual bondage that was strangling her life. He told her that she was fighting forces she couldn't see, that there were powers working against her in the shadows. Bolu brushed off his words, thinking her sadness was just showing through. But the pastor didn't give up. After service, he pulled Bolu's mother aside and told her urgently that her daughter needed serious prayer, that she was under serious spiritual attack. Bolu's mother, who had been praying desperately for months, immediately rallied other pastors and prayer warriors. They began a fierce spiritual battle, interceding for Bolu without her even knowing. 2 months later, Bolu discovered she was pregnant. When she announced the news to Jamal and his mother, her husband was overjoyed. But his mother's reaction was chilling. She screamed, a sound of pure terror and rage mixed together. Bolu assumed it was shock and happiness, but the truth was far darker. That night, Jamal's mother went back to the voodoo priest in a panic. He told her coldly that there was only one solution now: kill the child before it was born, or prepare to die herself. She chose murder. She began planning meticulously. One evening, she treated Bolu to a special dinner, cooking with her own hands for the first time since Bolu had entered the house. The food was delicious, seasoned with herbs and spices that masked the bitter taste of abortion-inducing poison. That night, Bolu began bleeding. By morning, the pregnancy was gone. Bolu was shattered. She couldn't understand why God was being so cruel to her, why life kept dealing her blow after blow. She told her mother, who immediately informed the pastor. The pastor knew spiritual warfare when he saw it, and he wasn't backing down. He organized a 12-day convention of intensive prayer, calling in warriors from across Lagos to intercede specifically for Bolu and her womb. The next morning after the prayers began, Jamal's mother couldn't get out of bed. She was bedridden, her body racked with unexplainable pain that made her scream in agony. Doctors found nothing wrong, but the pain continued, intensifying day by day. After a week of torment, delirious with suffering, she finally confessed everything to Jamal and Bolu. She told them about the coven, about the blood oath, about the magic worked on Bolu's womb, about the poison in the food that had killed their first child. The horror in that room was palpable as the truth spilled out like poison from an infected wound. But even after her confession, Jamal's mother didn't die immediately. Instead, she lingered for over a year, her body slowly failing as the consequences of her dark choices caught up with her. She was bedridden, dependent on the very woman she had tried to destroy, forced to watch as Bolu's belly grew round with new life. Because despite everything, Bolu had forgiven her. Despite the cruelty, the poison, the murder of her first child, Bolu chose mercy over vengeance. She cared for her mother-in-law during that final year, feeding her, bathing her, showing her a kindness the older woman had never shown in return. When Bolu gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Jamal's mother was there to see them. She wept as she held her grandchildren for the first and last time, knowing that her death was the price of their lives. 3 days later, she took her final breath. Jamal fell apart with guilt and grief. He apologized to Bolu endlessly, begging forgiveness for his weakness, for not protecting her, for allowing his mother to come between them and nearly destroy their marriage. Bolu forgave him too, though the scars would never fully heal. Years later, when people asked Bolu how she survived, how she endured such darkness and emerged into light, she would smile and say that prayer was more powerful than any curse, that love could outlast evil, and that forgiveness was the only key that could truly set a prisoner free. Her twins grew up knowing their grandmother's story, a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsessive love, dark covenants, and the terrible price of putting fear above faith. They learned that sometimes the monsters in our lives aren't strangers lurking in dark alleys but people sitting at our own dinner tables, smiling while they plot our destruction. But they also learned that light always defeats darkness in the end, that truth always rises to the surface, and that no curse is stronger than a mother's love protected by prayer and perseverance. Bolu eventually returned to medicine, opening her own practice and using her story to help other women trapped in toxic family situations. She became an advocate for young wives suffering under oppressive in-laws, speaking at churches and conferences about the importance of setting boundaries, recognizing spiritual warfare, and never sacrificing one's identity and purpose for anyone, not even for love. Jamal, for his part, spent the rest of his life making amends. He became the man he should have been from the beginning, a protector, a partner, a husband who stood beside his wife instead of cowering before his mother. The tragedy had transformed him, teaching him that silence in the face of evil makes you complicit in it, that love without courage is not love at all. Their home, once a place of torment and tears, became a sanctuary of healing and hope. The walls that had witnessed so much cruelty now echoed with children's laughter and joy. Bolu had survived the evil mother-in-law who tried to kill her grandchild to stay alive, and in surviving, she had learned the most important lesson of all: that no darkness is permanent, that every night eventually gives way to morning, and that the human spirit, when protected by faith and fortified by love, is unbreakable. What would you have done if you were in Bolu's shoes? Let's hear your thoughts in the comment section.